everybody, welcome to the Court of Public Opinion in our little Taj de Garage. Thank you all so much for the feedback. I'm still amazed at how so many people have found this broadcast, but I'm really glad that you did, and I can't tell you how nice it is to sit here on the edge of the table, which I call a desk, with a glass of red, and my dear friend Peter Clayton behind the camera, doing his magic, and then somehow it gets out there in the ether, and I'm glad that it does. A lot of people from the broadcast, I'm not sure that it was actually the last broadcast, or maybe the one before, when I was talking to you about the day that innocence died in radio, when the students took over the radio station, and from that time on security reigned and you couldn't move or breathe, or you had to have passes and electronic passwords and God knows what. And a lot of people wanted me to talk some more about some of the other things that I briefly alluded to as to moments in my broadcasting career that I remember. I won't do it now, but there's a wonderful a thing of which I am enormously proud. They were terrible, tragic circumstances, but a wonderful, gifted man of radio by the name of Marty Smith. He was the executive producer at DN at the time. He came in one morning with a phone number and said, look, there's a siege going on in Washington. There are reports of people being killed and hostages taken. We've got the phone number. Would you like to ring it? I said, yeah, well, yes. Well, of course, these days you couldn't do that because I think the first thing the police do is to take out the telephone lines in case you get some idiot FM breakfast jock who rings up and causes chaos out of more chaos, or more chaos out of chaos. So you can understand them taking out those telephone lines, but in those days they didn't do that. And I proceeded to have a one-off conversation with a mass murderer, and I think he's still in jail, to be honest with you. But it was the beginning, 77 I think it was, the beginning, for me anyway, of an awareness of this Islamic problem in the world and the hatred that some people in Islam have for Christians, but particularly Jews. This was a siege that took place. You can look it up if you want, I'm sure it's in the book somewhere. It was a siege of a thing called the B'nai B'rith building, which is a Jewish, or what can I call it, a club or organisation. Anyway, I'll come back, and in a later broadcast I'll tell you all about it, because it was spine-chillingly. It was certainly a moment in my broadcasting life which turned my blood cold. But I didn't want to talk to you about that. I wanted to talk to you about this thing that we have here in Australia, constantly referred to as the gap. Now, the gap, this is apparently the insoluble problem that exists between black and white in Australia. I, for one, think we should be all Australians. Doesn't matter whether we're coffee-coloured, we're pink, we're black, we're purple. Doesn't matter. We should all be one Australian, under one Australian flag, with one Australian anthem, one Australian language. That's my ideal. Maybe I'm naive. I'm sure I'll have people who will contact me after I say all this to put me right, or whatever. It got me thinking about what was this gap. Now, I know that the world is tribal. It's tribal because of perhaps colour, race, religion, history. We're a whole lot of tribes in the world. We would be a better country if we didn't have tribes. But I suspect it's ingrained in our DNA somehow. But the idea of white people, if I can use the terms broadly as black and white, the idea that white people have got to remain guilty and responsible for all of the disadvantage that is suffered by black people seems to me to be something we should question. When you look at the amount of money that we, the people, taxpayers, give to the Aboriginal cause, the Aboriginal nation, the Aboriginal people, it's $35 billion. That's with a B. That's the budget, $35 billion. That's on top of welfare. So we're just talking about this great big chunk of money. When you break it down, Aboriginal people make up about 3% of the population. Aboriginal people number about 500,000. There are 47,000 full-blood Aboriginal people. The other 500,000, well, 400 and something thousand, it seems that you don't have to be Aboriginal to claim to be an Aboriginal. You can claim Aboriginality. It's very rubbery. I don't know what the criteria is, but you can join the Aboriginal tribe without being an Aboriginal, which I can't imagine why that would be allowed. But anyway, if you take the $35 billion and you divide it between 500,000 people, works out to be about $75,000 for every man, woman and child, on top of welfare. And if you've got a family of maybe 4 or 5 in the house, you might even have 8 in the house, I don't know, depends on how big the house is. But that's $75,000 for every man, woman and child. Now, I can't get my mind around, maybe you can get your mind around, how anyone with that sort of money, every year, tax-free, could possibly be disadvantaged. Yet, I know, I walk down North Terrace here in Adelaide, and I see people sleeping in doorways, Aboriginal people, desperately poor, probably sick. God, it's winter! Horrible. If I was an Aboriginal, I would not be yelling about closing the gap, because the only gap that exists really is that white people are not advantaged as Aboriginal people are. So how does it happen? I can only assume that the Aboriginal person I see in the street is not getting the money. He or she should be saying, let's forget the gap. Where is the money? Show me the money. You can go to the budget and you can see that the money is spent. Then when I talk to people about what I perceive as a problem, they say to me, you're terribly naive, aren't you? The Aboriginal people are just the showpieces in the window. Where the money goes, you want to know where the money goes? The money goes to the Aboriginal industry. The industry. And it could be legal, it could be housing, it could be, well, you name it. The arts, arts are very big. So here we have a situation where we, the people, are doing the right thing. We are providing Aboriginal people, the first Australians, with $75,000 a year, and they don't get it. They don't get the money. But they also don't get the argument. What they get is the political claptrap, which is designed to do nothing but inflame the resentment, quite reasonable resentment, when Aboriginal people see white people advantaged. They don't sort of stop to think, well, are they advantaged or are we? And if we are, why aren't we getting the money? And do you know, there is not one politician that I'm aware of who has had the gumption or the integrity to stand up and say, this is ridiculous, this has got to stop. We are not going to feed this Aboriginal industry. What we'll do, because it's not working, if it was working I wouldn't be a critic. I'd say, okay, well, let's work with this model. But it's not to anybody's satisfaction except for the people with their noses in the trough. Well, if their noses aren't in the trough, where is the money going? Nobody asks, though. You could literally give every Aboriginal man, woman and child $75,000 and say, go and enjoy. Would they be happier? I argue yes, because they would be then masters of their own destiny and not subject to this kind of paternalistic thing. Oh, well, we couldn't possibly give the Aboriginal people the money because they wouldn't know what to do with it. Well, why don't you try? Why don't you give it a go? You never know. Because what you're doing at the moment, white Australia I mean, what you're doing at the moment isn't pleasing anybody. And more importantly, it's not working. What are your thoughts in the court of public opinion? Thank you for joining us.